Hey YouTube, it's kind of a cold, desolate day, and it looks like my daughter's gonna have to help our old dog, kind of wandering in the cold. I've had to rescue my big dog once. She got her feet cold and couldn't make it back in, so I had to carry her back. We've had some ice and snow here, and of course these people here in eastern Oklahoma act like they're being stranded for an entire winter. You know, I grew up in Wyoming, and they have no idea what winter is down here. Anyway, I want to talk about Taylor Sheridan series, like 1883, 1923, Yellowstone, all that. And I'm mentioning it because, you know, we were cooped up here in the cold, and me and my wife and daughter watching these shows, kind of having a marathon. Roads were closed and what have you. And a lot of people have been kind of referencing them as historically accurate sources. And while there are times when I think they're very right, there's also times when they're very wrong. And if you're a student of history and, oh shit, my daughter's yelling at my dog Raven. Yeah, she's headed to the creek in the freezing weather. It could be survival of the fittest. So, I don't know. Hey, look at this guy here. This is Augie. There he goes. Let me tell you what. That little shit right there, he's got more testosterone than most people I know. He is pumped up. He's aggressive. He sees a tree he don't like, he bites it. I was laughing. My daughter was scolding him yesterday. She threatened to cut his little balls off, and he just barked at her. It was fucking hilarious. So, back to my story. I think people reference things, and the guy, they're great stories. Always great actors. You got people like Sam Elliott. You got, of course, Kevin Costner in one. You've got Harrison Ford in 1923. And there are things I like about the series. I like about how it shows these challenges of the West, these different cultures of the West, and I'm talking about the American West here. The things that make us unique as Americans. Really, really like it. And it's been on my mind because I've got a lot of European students that I teach, and they have a lot of confusion and misunderstandings about who we are as Americans. And I'll probably make another video about that at another time, but I've noticed some issues, though, with little subtle changes. There's still some Hollywood wokeness, even in these TV shows. And people look at, say, someone like the actor Sam Elliott, kind of iconic Western actor, does a lot of good stuff. Big fan of some of his work. But I also remember how he kind of had this radical left-wing kind of, I wouldn't say radical, but definitely a left-leaning slant, a Hollywood slant in his style of voting and his perspective on things, even when it comes to the Second Amendment. So you got to remember who people have to remember that when they're watching these shows, they're watching a performance. They're watching actors. These are all the theater kids. Every one of them, even the ones you think are macho, tough cowboy actors, they're all theater kids. There's nothing tough about any of them, you know? My dog digging for something in the wild, I don't know what. So, it's not that they're all entirely wrong. It's just sometimes they're trying to push a hidden message, a subtle message. Some things are good. For example, I do like, it was on 1923. There were these characters, they were fugitives, Native Americans. They had fled from Montana into western Oklahoma, kind of in North Texas. And I remember the old father was trying to teach his daughter and this young man how to make flint arrows, how to make basic tools. And I'm paraphrasing him, but he was essentially talking about how the desire for modern things, the desire for tools, equipment, things that make your life easier, that governments want you to quit doing things for yourself. When you get to the point where you can't do anything for yourself, you have to beg. And they want nations of beggars. They don't want people who can think independently. They don't want people who can build things themselves, survive anywhere, find food, water anywhere. They want you to be beggars. And you kind of take a look at our modern society. That's essentially what we are. What do? We negotiate away our rights for greater and greater security. Now, the American founding fathers, with their old world, I would still say Americans kind of hold on to that old world, old European mindset more than modern Europeans. They had the philosophical arguments for individual liberty. I hear somebody going crazy. Ah, Raven, get over here, pup.
Raven. Here, puppy.
Oh, anyhow, we'll see how this works out. So, I'm distracted by my dogs, I apologize. So anyway, they made the philosophical arguments of the old world, but there was also that influence of the land itself and the Native Americans in this land. So, of course, there's absurd things going on when I see like ICE protests and they say, nobody's illegal on stolen land. What an absurd statement that is. What a completely ridiculous, nonsensical, idiotic statement. And if you believe in that, then you're probably an NPC idiot or useful idiot, however you want to look at it, because you clearly don't know. You know the prepackaged version of what you think is history being spoon-fed to you by people with agendas. But I'm not getting into that right now. I'm looking at what I see as the positive influences, that cultural mixture, the hardships of this landscape, the uniqueness of it. It's all there. But we got to watch out for the little subtle propaganda in these films. Of course, one of the mistakes I found was crazy was these priests from a boarding school. And boarding schools were terrible to Native Americans. They were hideous. I'm glad they mentioned that, but they seem to carry it a little far. You know, they made it to where like, and listen, I'm not a Christian. I'm not a fan of boarding schools or church schools of any kind. And it's funny because I remember seeing them tracking this Indian girl from Montana into western Oklahoma. That's extremely far. You know, a lot of Europeans don't realize how big the United States really is. And not very pragmatic or practical. They're tracking her down because she killed some vicious nuns. And it just seemed a little over the top. You know, every nun was violent or a rapist, or, you know, the priests were beating her and they were cruel and torturing her and all these horrible things. And yeah, I'm sure there are instances of this, but they kind of made it to where it was just over the top. It was a bit much. Exaggerated, definitely. And looking at some of those things, or these priests are hunting people down. I remember them having a shotgun. They were using the plastic red shells. So, of course, we're talking about the early 1920s. I don't recall them having red plastic shells in 1923, but, you know, again, like I said, when you know a bit of history, even the simple things really stand out when they're off. Some of the things in his series are a little crazy. There's kind of the fake tough guy thing, the classical image. They're kind of still giving you that entertainment. There's always drama, there's always challenges, there's always one tragedy after another. It's always kind of a roller coaster ride. And, you know, I understand it, it's entertainment. I'm not trying to shit all over a very entertaining and well-acted series. Man, he can move. That's little Ace. He's half husky and he's a fast little shit. He loves this stuff. They're hunting rabbits. I had to rescue Big Dog yesterday because she was out in those woods and she couldn't walk anymore. The rabbit ran past me as I went to pick her up. So anyway, I think of, there's one clip I seen, I believe it was Mayor of Kingstown. And there was a school, I don't know if it was a prison reform thing. I didn't watch much of the series. And I'm making this point here. There was I think there were Native American girls in like a prison reform system. And they were being told about history. And they were told that post-Civil War, the former Confederates all went west. and oppressed the Indians in the West. You know, they oppressed the Indians in the West. I'm like, oh, that's a lie. That's a big fucking lie, you know? See, this is where propaganda, American propaganda, likes to cover its historical tracks here. The reality is, the North raped the American South. I guess I'm not supposed to say that word on YouTube, but come on. It's an English word, it's descriptive, and it's in the right context. I am by no means promoting it. Anyway, see stupid shit like that. Anyway, so the North raped the South, essentially. Destroyed its resources, its people, its resistance. It was not about slavery, not really. There were instances where, yes, you could say it was about slavery. There were upper echelons of people who had interest in keeping their slaves, sure. But the average Confederate soldier was not fighting for some rich man to keep his handful of slaves, which were less than 10% of the wealthy in the South anyway. So if you follow that, if you like to believe in that bullshit, that it was about slavery, then you probably believe that the war in Iraq was about freedom and democracy as well. Anyway, the reality is many Native American tribes got along very well with the Confederacy. I'm here in Oklahoma, and I'm telling you, they don't like to say it now, but a lot of the Choctaw and Cherokee aligned themselves very well. They got along. The reality is the North destroyed the South with severe acts of cruelty, oppression, theft. They took everything. And it was the start of this monstrous federal government we have now. And then they went west, and the same thing they learned how to do to the Confederacy, to the Southerners, they enacted upon the Native American populations as well. So there's little things like this that are important to make note of. Of course, there are some truths in these stories, but they like to change just enough of the crucial details to spin a different narrative, you know, than what actually happened in the past. Yeah, so it's just something to be aware of. I don't like, and I'm only bringing this up because I've been watching it recently, and there are people that like to somehow cite these series as a historical source. There are plenty of good historical sources. But also, there's something I'm just going to say, this is maybe my bias coming out as someone who grew up in the American West. And being a little kid and seeing people, it's funny because seeing this old series where us Native Americans wore a type of blanket, a type of poncho, and I can remember being a little kid and seeing older people dressed like that. I could tell that's how they dressed as children. They didn't, it was really kind of fascinating. You don't, to see things as they really were, you know? The American freedom American freedom's hard to describe. You know, I remember, for example, being 13 years old, me and my friends, our moms, renting a burnt out little camper at Lake Vivenotten in Wyoming during a fishing derby. Freeze your ass off, ice fishing, big population of people camped on the ice. Old West ruined cabins not far from us, snowmobiles, hanging out with cowboys and bikers who fed us peach schnapps, you know. There was no law enforcement anywhere, not a single one. It was kind of like the Old West. We stayed there for a good week, and it was almost like an Old West experience. People fishing, people hunting, and you know what's funny? People drinking, giving us kids booze and putting us on a four-wheeler. It was a wild time. And you know what? They looked after each other. That's the thing that nobody talks about in the American West. People actually looked out for each other. The common sense people. The West will purify you. You will have common sense there. Because if you don't, nature will take you out. It's not like we have now, this modern society where idiots are all over the highways, in our stores, at our jobs, on our TVs, as elected officials. You know, we don't have that shit. You know, the old West mentality was nature reigns supreme. You will listen to it, or you will perish as a result of it. So, some ways they catch that in those series. In some ways they miss the point. They still try to politicize it. So anyway, that's just my rant for today. And my question I would ask for all of you is, if you especially are a little older, maybe, you remember how the West was, the Western mindset, not this interconnected, electronic nonsense. Me personally, I'm thinking about getting back to more primitive skills. I'm starting to get into knot tying and maybe fire building and basic survival stuff. Atlatls, is that how you pronounce it? I think it's atlata without the L. Anyhow, primitive skills are great. Love technology. Come on, I love me a good, bolt action rifle suppressed with a thermal imaging optic, yeah. But let me see how far I can aim that spear chucker, the atlatl. All right, that's how I'm going to say it. Anyway, I'm rambling now, enjoying the weather. It's great. And I will see you next time. Bye.